Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. Today in this video, we're going to look at one of my mini Cattleya orchids. This is Cattleya, a cross between Fire Magic and Polestar. This is this particular orchid's first flowering ever under my care, and it's also its own first flowering. I've had this one for about 2 years, and when I got it, it was still a very tiny seedling, but now it's giving me its first bloom. When it was developing a sheath, I wasn't sure it would continue to produce flowers or buds, but as you can see here, that this is when I was sure, because I can see some shadow through the sheath. And with this particular orchid, I didn't have to mess around with the sheath or cut it open for the buds to come out. It just push it out. The buds just push out on their own. So that was very nice. I know for certain Cattleya types, sometimes the sheaths are probably just thicker and stronger, and if you don't cut the sheaths open, sometimes the flowers don't develop correctly within the sheath, and sometimes they just don't push out through the sheath. But with this one, I got lucky. I didn't have to do anything, and they come out very nicely. From the time that I discovered it was producing a sheaths to the opening of its first flower, I think altogether it's about 3 months. So it does take a little bit of patience while we wait for the flowers to open. Now let's take a quick look at a video clip. This orchid is potted in semi-hydro method, and since I transferred this orchid into semi-hydro, it has grown many roots, and some of the roots are already in the reservoir area. And so to me, this orchid really is in the what I call autopilot mode. And the reason I say that is I just need to give it proper care in terms of watering and fertilizer. Unless this orchid outgrow this particular container, I don't really need to bother with any kind of repot, because the media doesn't break down, and some roots are already very used to the high moisture, high water condition that I can actually feel very, very safe about leaving water at the bottom, in the reservoir area. And it just goes on, it's in autopilot mode, and I only need to give it water, fertilizer water, every 2 to 3 weeks. So for me, this orchid is very easy to take care of from now on. And at the base, there are 2 new growths coming out, and the flowers are pretty cute, and it has a slight fragrance. But unfortunately, the 3rd bud blasted. It just didn't. It was so small, and then it stopped growing, and eventually it just dried up. But I'm happy with 2 flowers since it's first flowering. When orchids are forming buds, it's best that you don't move them around, especially with Cattleya. My previous Cattleya buds, if you move them around too much, they get blasted too, just like Phalaenopsis. But I think Phalaenopsis are in general more sensitive to movement and change of environment, but Cattleya too. So you really want to make sure you don't move them around as they're developing their buds. For this orchid, it has a very mild fragrance. It's sweet, but it's also smelling very powdery. And the first flower that opened is this one, and you can see that the top sepal and the 2 petals are actually one big sepal petal. It's actually sticking together. It's just one big one, so it's looking a little weird. And that's okay, because I know the first flowering, oh, here you can see it's indeed all together, like the sepal and the two petals are together. This is what I think some orchid hobbyists would call unstable genes, especially for orchids that are blooming for the very first time. Sometimes it's almost like they don't know how to act or behave, but then after the second or third flowering, they should come out correctly. And the second flower, as you can see here, is missing a petal. So the first two flowers of this orchid unfortunately don't have the correct bloom, but it's okay. I'll take what I can get. It's first flowering, so I should not hold this against this orchid. I do fertilize this orchid with quarter strength fertilizer, just like how I fertilize my other orchids, but occasionally I do allow a dry period to go longer than 2 weeks. For example, the watering cycle at my environment is about 2 weeks, but if I see that there is still some slight moisture, I let this orchid go for another week, or maybe, skip a watering and then wait for the next watering. And it's okay, because these Cattleya orchids they have pseudobulbs, so if it's just drier for another extra 1 week or 2 weeks, typically in my environment they do okay. But when I'm on vacation, before I go away, I make sure I tap up to the very top of the reservoir, so that way this orchid can go for another 2 to 3 weeks without me having to worry that it's lacking water. And here's a clear view of the new growths coming out at the base. It has 2 new growths coming, so that's good, and it's also blooming, so this orchid is doing very well. And for those of you who've seen my other videos, you may realize that I actually have a lot more Phalaenopsis orchid, and that's because that's my favorite orchid type. The flowers last longer and they have more varieties. With Cattleya, I still like them, but their flowers just don't last as long as Phalaenopsis orchid, and also Cattleya orchids tend to get real big, and that's why I only go for mid-size or miniature Cattleyas, because I really don't want to have any orchid that are taking too much of my growing space on the growing rack, because I just don't have a whole lot of horizontal space for big orchids. Anyway, overall I'm really happy with this orchid's first flowering, even though both flowers have a little bit of imperfection to it, but the color looks great and the fragrance is pleasant, so I'm looking forward to its second flowering to see if the flowers will come out normal. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!